Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The workshop has been called to order. Mayor Roscoe,
Present.
Councilmember Kaplan,
Here.
Councilmember Langdon, Vice Mayor McCormick,
Here.
Councilmember Moss,
Here.
Councilmember Sardinius. He is online. Councilmember Vasquez is able to join us this evening. The next item is please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item, Mr. Mayor, is an announcement. Executive session announcement from the village attorney.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm requesting that we have an executive session in the case of Ana Maria Agares and Alfredo Fernandez Estrada as legal guardians of a minor child, MF, First Village of Key Biscayne in the Circuit Court of the 11th Judicial Circuit in Miami-Dade County, case number 2023-005-300-CA1. The purpose of this session is to discuss settlement. The clerk will provide reasonable notice of when this session will occur in the future. We anticipate holding this session prior to our council meeting on the 27th. Thank you.
Okay. We have an LPA on the 27th too, right?
Correct. This session internally, when the clerk will provide the notice, I think we were planning to do it for 5:45.
That'll
And
work.
the LPA will be at, the local planning agency meeting will be at 6:15. And then the council meeting at 6:30.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And let's go on to the discussion and workshop item for today. Manager, walk us through it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members, and welcome community. Now we look forward to this evening. We're excited. As you can see, we're going to give you an update on the Resilient Infrastructure and Adaptation Program. It's been a long summer. We've got a lot of stuff done. It's been a hot summer. I think we all realize it's been quite a hot summer. But the team has been working hard, and they're ready to give a presentation tonight, primarily about Zone 1, giving an update of where we are on the status. We went through a 30% design review in late July. We've been able to look at it, recock, and give you a great update tonight. We're also going to talk about the next steps in the program, the direction of where we're going in the future, but most importantly, how we've put a framework in place that will allow us to have flexibility and a decision-making process that we can move forward once we finish Zone 1. So we're excited about tonight. You can see we're about ready to kick off. And what I'll do is, who's got slides?
Control of the slides.
All that we have.
You have the clicker.
If you got a clicker, why don't you give it to me, because I'm going to run right through these quickly. Okay, so love to start this off every time we do this presentation, because there's only one reason why we do what we're trying to do. This is all about Key Biscayne. This is all about our residents. We want to make sure that what we're doing with resilient infrastructure is here to serve the residents. And of course, as we all know, we cherish where we live, and we want to make sure we continue to live here prosperously and as well as safely. What I'd like to do is turn this now over to Mike Huda, who is our program manager from Black and Veatch. He's going to walk us through the threats, vulnerabilities, and risks slides. I know you guys have seen this before, but I want to make sure that you pay close attention to this framework, because this is really the basis of what we're trying to do. And Mike will also begin to talk about how we're going to put numbers against this after our vulnerability assessment. So, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good evening, council members, mayor, community. It's an honor to be here, and it's been an honor to work on this program. My name is Mike Huda. I'm the program manager for the Resilience Program with Black and Veatch. In the past 1 year, Black and Veatch has been working on the program to set it up, build the foundation, build the tools, along with help coordinate the program with all of the projects that have been ongoing. And we're going to get to a lot of those today. But as the manager said, the reason we're here is because the village has a a number of threats, which, as we can read behind me, are mostly environmental, which focus on rainfall, groundwater, tidal, a lot of water, a lot of flooding of the streets. That reason specifically for the village is because of the low-lying islands and the vulnerabilities, which I see some members here that are part of the vulnerability assessment focus group. And they've probably seen this a number of times, but we know that there's a lot of specifics for the village that make it a challenge. And with our program, our job is to mitigate those challenges and to make the village better to live in, for a better quality of life, and to protect not just the properties, but the people and the investment. So one of the things that we did during the program is conduct a vulnerability assessment. The vulnerability assessment it has 4 basic purposes. It prioritizes and categorizes all of the assets in the village. It actually quantifies the benefits for this program. It puts some economic numbers towards the program, and it also satisfies a state statute, and it qualifies the village for additional grants going forward. One of the things from the vulnerability assessment is some flood exposure. This, what's behind me is a map of projected rainfall flooding on the streets in 2060, and it is both with and without the program stormwater upgrades.
So quite simply, just to kind of follow on what Mike is saying there, obviously, what he's saying is we did nothing, what would be, we would see in 2070, or 2060 as it looks right here, you'd see what's on the left. We went forward with the program that we're recommending, and particularly we're just talking about Zone 1 tonight. I want to make sure we're focused on that. But we will move forward when we see that kind of flooding to the right. Obviously, the flooding doesn't go away, but very significantly different on the left versus the right.
And we can specifically look at Zone 1 being the most inundated area in the village, which is why we're focusing on Zone 1 at this time. Not why these projections are so much greater in 2060 than right now is because of projected sea level rise, which for our purposes, we've used NOAA intermediate high. So here's a little chart just on the NOAA projections.
Just to add, I mean, those projections are coming from the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, and a decision was made to go with NOAA intermediate high because the compact recommended that for the infrastructure that's being worked on in the life cycle of that infrastructure, that would be the most appropriate projection to work from.
So as we spoke about, this is a multifaceted program. We're looking at all angles to protect the village. So our purpose is to protect the residents, obviously the property, you can read right behind me. But what we like to think of is the program is helping secure the village against all of these threats. There's a little visual behind me. We're doing that with the lines of effort, which have been preceded in the strategy sessions. Those remain the same. Shoreline protection, working on the beaches and the bayside. Stormwater system upgrades. We've been working on that diligently for the last year. Now we're actually at 30% for the first zone. Roadway improvements. So while we're opening up the roads and installing the new stormwater, we'll also be doing some minor adjustments to help alleviate flooding and to give you better clearance. Utility hardening. So the plan is to underground the utilities in Zone 1, make it more resilient towards wind, less power outages. And then regulatory modernization. This includes all the ordinances to ensure better future building in the village.
So as we go through this, and one of the things that, when we first developed, kicked off this plan, I think we started talking this about 2 years ago, our commitment to you as a residents and you as a council is to ensure that we have clear communications. And you can see this right here. We want to make sure that whatever program we come up is focused on solutions, that we're not wasting our time. We're trying to address the problem, which is flooding, and trying to address our reliability of utilities, electrical, and telecommunications. We want to make sure we go through this in a very thoughtful way. We want to make sure there's a benefit in the end, and you heard Mike talk about the vulnerability assessment. We'll go into some of those numbers as time comes. And then lastly, we want to make sure that we do it with partners. We can't do this by ourselves. Partners in the community, but also partners across Miami-Dade County. You've seen this again. I hope you've seen this again. If you've heard our presentations, we mentioned this a lot. In the end, these are the community benefits that come out of it. Reduced flooding, protected shoreline, enhanced quality of life, strengthened readiness for storm and emergencies, and ensuring that we have increased service reliability, safety, and aesthetics for Underwood. So that's kind of the introduction as we kick in. Now we're going to kick off more into the details of the program. But again, it's very important to make sure the long summer, long hot summer, a lot of people traveling, that we put what we're trying to do into context. So, Rowan, tell us where we've been and where we're going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, before that,
Before we do that,
Sexy slides.
what you've seen before, maybe you've seen it. However, during the vulnerability assessment, we've been able to actually quantify some of those benefits with the program. So what we're looking at right here is based on FEMA economic modeling on the stormwater over a 50-year projected time frame. Actually installing the stormwater system can prevent $5 to $1 going forward. So that's a pretty large. FEMA would normally just need basically anything over 1 to 1, and these projections are showing 5 to 1. This is based on the AECOM modeling for the 2060 storm. Has this economic modeling system that FEMA uses. We use all of the data for the village in order to come up with this this number, but it's a pretty compelling case.
We'll use these numbers later. We'll use these numbers later as we go into some of your economic investment and return on investment. But Rowan, why don't you talk about where we've been and where we're going for the future?
yeah. So I mean, it's been a pretty long and winding road, no pun intended. I'll mainly focus on 2015 till now because a lot of really critical work has been undertaken in this, I'd say, 10-year period. Let's just say 2015 to 2025, that lays the foundation that enables us to do this ambitious effort of dealing with the flooding in the K8 Zone 1 area. What's not on there is that in 1993, the original Stormwater Master Plan was undertaken, and since that time, a 2011 update was done, and then a 2015 hydraulic and hydrologic assessment was done by EAC that basically set 2 tiers of recommendations out there for improving the street flooding challenges. One set of recommendations were already acted on. Those were all the backflow preventers that were put in back in like 2017, 2018, and that was great. The other set of recommendations that was made in 2015 were big capital improvements to the infrastructure. Since that time, AECOM was brought on board in 2019. In 2020, we passed a bond in order to start looking towards how we were going to address those big capital-intensive improvements. And then in 2021, 2022, 2023, AECOM has been working its way steadily towards the point that we're at now, which is that we're in full-blown design of that first zone around the school. The vision plan was done in 2022. In between, we brought Black and Veatch on as the program managers and construction managers and developed a strategy for the Resilient Infrastructure and Adaptation Program. At this point, and this is an exciting time to be at, we're pretty much on our way towards 60% design. Like Steve mentioned, in July, we did a 30% design review, which was an exciting step. Now we're on our way to 60% design. In around November, we're going to start going into permitting. And then once we're at 100% design, we can actually do what everybody wants to do, which is actually build something that deals with the problem. So it's a long time coming, but a lot of critical steps have been taken in order to position us for success once we go into construction. And then at that point, construction will take however long it takes, which is probably on the order of like 1.5 to 2 years. And then we all get to cut a ribbon on a really rainy day and see that we've dealt with the problem. So that's kind of the trajectory that we've been on. And then in the interim, a certain number of things have definitely been completed that really speak to trying to advance resilience in the village. Not the least of which is the immediate flood control and mitigation project, which was sort of a small scale, let's see if we can make the existing system drain just a little bit better without spending too much money, knowing that we've got a much larger long-term solution coming our way. But for the people that are still experiencing flooding every time we have a meaningful rain event, maybe we can make the pain a little bit less. So we did that. We've also been regularly doing our beach renourishments. We did that in 2021 when I first came on board. That was to deal with the effects of Hurricane Irma. Unfortunately, in a relatively short span of time, we had to deal with another beach renourishment as a result of Hurricane Ian and Nicole and some unnamed storms. We did that successfully. We also completed the village-wide drainage assessment with AECOM. That was a huge step because it gave us a very, very good tool and ability to analyze the entire stormwater system and understand how and where we would do what we do to improve the flooding across the entire village. We also completed the vulnerability assessment, as Mike mentioned. Thankfully, we were able to do that entirely grant funded, which is fantastic. That was money that came from the Resilient Florida grant program. And in completing that, like Mike mentioned, it opens up the opportunity for us to continue going back to Resilient Florida for additional funding that would come to us in order to help defray the costs of the Zone 1 project. So that's huge. And then additionally, AECOM finished the basis of design report, which we call 30% Zone 1 engineering design submittal. So they did the basis of design report, which is a sort of 30% design light, but they've also in July completed the full-blown 30% design with all the detailed cost estimated that goes along with that. And now we're on our way to a 60% design, which should be complete in December. So this is exciting. A lot of things are getting done. It might not seem that way because you don't see bulldozers out there and cranes and whatnot, but everything is moving along step by step along schedule. So that's an exciting point to be at.
So we hope that we've made everybody aware of some of these programs previously, but on top of that, we do have an active website on the village website that's under the Resilience Program and Elevating Our Island to Paradise. And here there's an interactive map. It shows where these projects are. It gives a brief synopsis of what the schedule is. It gives a description of what it is, and obviously location. This gets updated regularly, and the goal is to continue to show how this is a village-wide program.
And this is accessible already. I mean, people can reach this from the village website.
Anything else you want to say on that?
No, it's live.
This is a good product, so please jump into it. It's on our website, and if you don't have it, let's make sure we get it out. You can see if you want to take a picture of it, whatever you want, but there's that's the website link at the bottom.
And this is going to continue to grow as we move forward. So as we're in Zone 1 and in construction, there's going to be a lot of detail about what's happening in Zone 1 that'll be available through this portal.
The goal is to be able to give the information to the residents as we go street by street once construction actually starts. But at this point, it's showing a village-wide overview.
Starting what?
We'll get to there. We'll get to the details.
We'll
So
get
yeah,
there.
we're getting.
In a way, I would even say that we've already started Zone 1 because we're designing and we're on our way towards 100% design. So in my mind, Zone 1's already started.
So anyway, so let's jump into the strategy. Let's talk about the big picture, Pat, and we'll get right down to that Zone 1 real quickly. So So what we want to do is frame out the entire strategy as a whole. And so what we want to do is we set it up in that we have a main effort, and we'll go into that in a real second, but we have supporting projects we're going to do because there are other projects that are moving at the same time. And there are also shaping actions that we're doing, things such as ordinances, agreements with different folks. So we'll go into those as we dig deeper into the presentation. But what I wanted to show up above, so if you look at the main effort right there, we're moving forward in Zone 1, moving forward with the Corps of Engineers feasibility study for the shoreline. What we're going to do is there are built-in times where we can step back, we can pause, make decisions, observe what's going on, and then decide whether we want to move forward. What is the next step? We're going to move forward to Zone 2, Zone 3, Zone 4. Are we going to go in a different direction? We'll talk about that more in the future, and obviously we want to make sure we have the council's input on that, but it gives us an idea of a decision-making framework that gives us the flexibility that we've been talking about over the last year or so.
Steve, can you just quickly just tell everybody how many zones that we do have? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that.
Okay, so yeah, so we've got a total of 8 zones, if you haven't seen it before, and I know that's small in the bottom right-hand corner. The one we're focusing, it looks like is right between Colleen and Mike's head for most of you guys, is Zone 1, if you want to point it out. Mike, you want to zoom in on it? Right there.
This is zone 1.
Yep, so that's the one that we're going to talk about.
Why zone 2 is split into 2?
So what we did, it's actually,
Yeah, it is.
is this what, 2? I can't see it. Yes.
2A and
Yes,
2B.
yes, so there is, as we did more and more modeling, we identified, and I think everyone knows, that the flooding is primarily in the southern part of Zone 2, less so in north. So we can either tackle it as a full zone, or we can break it apart into 2A or 2B. It just gives us more flexibility.
Yeah, and also just to add to that, because we've been able to close the discharge deficit gap in Zone 1 the way we have chosen to go, that gives us the flexibility to move, pivot later down the road if we choose to 3 or 2A, and we're also in the process of working with the yacht club and discharge capacity at the yacht club, which gives us additional flexibility in terms of what you end up doing down the road beyond 2A and 2B. So that's kind of the way that.
Let's drive on to this. So, okay,
Yeah.
so what I want to do is I kind of give you the big framework. I'm going to pass it over to Mike to deep dive into the main effort, which will soon very quickly get us to Zone 1. So why don't you go ahead, Mike?
Yeah, I think that we got a little core explanation.
Okay.
Before that, and so just to quickly give you an overview of what's happening with the Corps, we initially had them working on the ocean side. Then it was determined that we needed to do a whole of island solution, and they agreed to do an analysis of the back bay, the bay side. Together, that's basically a whole of island shoreline protection solution that we're driving towards. The back bay feasibility study is underway. We kicked it off probably like about 6 months ago. They're working towards a future without project analysis as a step 1. And while they're doing that, they're also refining their scope, schedule, and budget for the work to be done beyond the future without project. So that would be then the future with project, in which what ultimately leads to the shoreline protection solutions that would be considered for implementation, to protect the island. That's on track. Again, everything with the Corps is sort of like a long-term proposition. So we're on the road, but it'll be 3-4 year process. So that's just something that's constantly going to be happening in the background as we focus entirely on Zone 1.
Thanks, Rowan. So what I like to do, Mike, as we jump into this, I'd like you to kind of walk us through, but I want to make sure that the council members have an opportunity to ask questions and give some feedback as we go through in Zone 1. So why don't you lead us through that discussion?
Absolutely. So for Zone 1, as we spoke about, this is probably the most vulnerable part of the village. It centers around the K through 8 basin. The zone was determined by doing the village-wide drainage assessment, which came up with different areas where the stormwater actually sits. Behind me, you can see a map of what Zone 1 entails. It shows the actual roads that will be constructed, and the shaded areas are basically the houses that will be on those roads. where we're at right now, what it entails is new stormwater, new roads, utility undergrounding in this area. There'll be one new pump station, which will be located in Harbor Park, currently settled in on the south side of Harbor Park. And then new same outfalls, rebuilt outfalls, and dissipator structures on seawalls going into the bay.
There will be a new outfall.
There will be a new
Yeah.
outfall as well. Generally speaking, it's south of Heather, north of Westwood, and then from Harbor Drive over to, I guess that's Fernwood.
Yeah, I'd also like to add that as we're building the stormwater system in this area, there may be conflicts with water and sewer lines, so those are gonna be addressed as well. We're coordinating very closely with Water and Sewer Department. In certain instances, they have old water lines or undersized water lines that they'd like to have replaced, in which case we will replace them when we're in the ground putting in the stormwater plumbing. Obviously, conflicts are gonna have to be addressed. And then also, any areas that are deficient in fire hydrants will be added as well to have the right spacing between all the fire hydrants per what the fire department needs.
So what I'd like to do is, Mike, if we could walk them through, I want to make sure the council members have an opportunity to ask some questions on this.
Well, I was gonna say, I have a question about the graphs on the bottom. I don't understand, we have 3% of the budget spent. What is the budget? And what is spent and what is the budget? Same thing with schedule, same thing with scope. I see graph, but I don't understand what we're working with.
Absolutely, and we're gonna get to that in the next slide
Okay,
in
then if I-
detail. We're
That's
gonna
just
go
an
over the
overview.
budget.
Yeah,
Right.
and this
I
goes
think
in the timeline.
What
right
you
here.
can see though from just those graphs is that at the time, we're only 3% on the total budget because we're in the engineering part of it. The majority of the costs are gonna be in construction. And then as far as schedule and scope, they're pretty aligned, which is, we're basically right on track with our schedule. Scope is based on amount of task items, and we've got a master schedule with task lists. So it's basically a percentage of tasks. We could weight some of those tasks heavier, but that's generally where we're at. And schedule is overall timeline of what this is gonna take projected. And we'll get into that a little bit on the next slide.
Mike, why don't you run us through some of the critical facts and assumptions and some of the constraints and risks that we're facing?
Absolutely. So we've determined level of service. We've determined what our discharge deficit requirements are. We've determined where the pump station is going to be. We've been working very closely with our utility partners to get the preliminary design of what their requirements are going to be. So we've moved pretty far ahead. Now, there's still a lot to do. We're at 30%. We just went past 30% design. So now we have real drawings that are being worked on. With that, we have more detail that we're building. So with that also comes less assumptions and more assumptions and risks that we can address. We have listed out and we have identified a number of them behind me. This is what we work towards. This is what we work towards on mitigating. And it's still going to take a little bit of effort as we move on to 60%, where we can start doing some of those deconflictions.
So I think this is where I think, I think council members should really dig in and ask some questions about some of the decisions that we have to make. And obviously we want to make sure we kind of cue them up for some kind of the timeline of some of the information that they're going to have in order to make some of these decisions moving forward.
Absolutely.
So if there's anything that, Councilmember Moss or if you want to ask some questions on that.
Not at the moment, no.
Sorry, just to give you a general sense, we're planning on being at 60% design come December. Okay?
That was gonna be my question.
So come December, 60% design. By the time we're at 60% design, we've got enough that we can start feeding the permitting machine what they need to initiate the permitting process. We've already started pre-permitting. We've already been meeting with Durham. We've met with them multiple times, so they know what's coming and they know the concept. They know the approach as to where we're going to be putting the water. So their pump is primed, for lack of a better word. Once we are past 60% design, we plan on being done with 100% design, probably around Mayish, April, Mayish, because we're really shooting for SRF in the fall, in September. Is that?
The
It's
applicant,
August.
August?
Well, the application's due in June, so SRF requires that we complete all permitting and we have all of our designs completely done before we submit an application for them to review. They'll let us know if we're approved for a loan in August or September, and at that point, we can start using that loan funding.
Tell them that stands for state revolving loan.
Yes.
State revolving loan.
Florida's state revolving loan fund. You might have heard us talk about it as a very low interest loan for construction. It's usually under 2% for communities like ours, which is well below market rate. And we don't have to pay back that money until we're completely done with the construction project. So the interest isn't accruing, and we're not having to make debt service payments while we're under construction.
Right, so then that's the funding piece of the equation. That machine takes time to ultimately generate what's necessary to then start construction. And so we're probably planning on putting RFQ, RFP type bid documents out on the street sometime around next summer.
Yeah.
Essentially, with the thought that then come the end of calendar year 2025, beginning 2026, we've selected a contractor and we can actually start construction. And then at that point, construction is going to march along steadily, probably for a solid year and a half to 2 years in order to complete the entire thing. Now, we might be able to start building some pieces before other big pieces. And so that's going to require some decision making on the part of council and whatnot. The Harbor Park pump station situation is something that we're going to start really engaging deeply the community, basically starting September and marching through the rest of the calendar year and into the springtime as we approach 100% design deadline or milestone, and that's gonna require a lot of input from the residents. There's certain pieces of that puzzle that are gonna be unmovable, but then there are other pieces that are not, and we'll be able to sort of obtain feedback and input from the community in those regards. And so that kind of is like a high level sort of timeline as to where we're headed. But ultimately, we're talking probably sometime in 2028 that you get to cut a ribbon and watch it rain and watch the pumps do their thing, you know. So the reality is it seems like a long time, but it's actually pretty ambitious, aggressive schedule. And I can't really envision being able to do it any faster.
Progress is really, it seems, picking up noticeably.
It's sort of going like this.
With, this question about outfall acquisition, prior in time wasn't particularly time relevant because we were at an earlier stage. We're getting to a later stage, this starts to become very important.
That's a very good point that you bring up, and you might recall that when we were going through the steps that got us to where we are now, there was essentially a milestone, because remember there was a lot of different scenarios and alternatives and whatnot, and each of them required you to have some kind of discharge somewhere. And we had a milestone of, I believe it was basically like May, June, as to drop dead, where's this water gonna go? And we were able to determine that, and in so determining that, that's what enabled us to then further our efforts on the projected budget, the cost estimating and whatnot, and really sort of gain confidence in our costing numbers. So that was a real big step to take, was that discharge piece. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So any more specific questions on Zone 1 before we start going? Actually, we actually have the outfall status next, but then we'll start going into some of the investment discussions as well.
Well, why don't we take a pause here, and we have some people who might want to ask questions about some of the things that we've talked about so far.
Sure.
All right, let's.
Could you update us on the 160 CFS, what that means?
Okay.
Sure, okay, so.
Can you read the question?
We got a whole slide for that for you.
want,
Look at that.
You want an explanation of what the 160 CFS number means? Okay, so CFS is cubic feet per second. So that's essentially a rate at which you are discharging water, okay? So in order for us to move the volumes of water that we see that inundate the roads in the area of Zone 1, we need to push out 160 CFS, cubic feet per second. It's a lot of water, okay? Right now, as the system exists today, we've got about 47.
No.
At best, we've got 47. So it was a big gap to close, and the way we've decided to close it was by maintaining our existing outfalls, of which we have 3, and then adding a 4th, which is new. And that 4th is going to generate about 100 plus CFS, maybe even 200 plus CFS, because it's about 10 CFS, it's 25 CFS per 10 linear feet of dissipator structure. So we're going to have more discharge capacity than we theoretically need, but that for Zone 1. But that extra discharge capacity gives us the flexibility in terms of what we choose to do beyond Zone 1 whenever we choose to do that, okay? So that's the thing with CFS. So this this map basically is showing you the existing outfalls, not the amount of CFS that we're getting today, but what we could potentially bring it up to if we maximize the size of the pipe and put a dissipator structure on the end, given the existing easements that we have. So that 250 CFS is the new one, and that's something that we're working on now and locking in. But we're really close. So we told the design engineers, go forth and conquer. We're going to put the majority of the discharge out that new outfall. So we're doing really well in this department.
That assumes one.
It assumes, well, you will be able to start at 1 inch per hour discharge rate from the pump station, but we'll be able to get as high as 2 inches per hour. And that's with that configuration on the outfalls. Yeah.
With the addition of another pump.
Yeah, so
Should it be necessary down the road?
it will be built to accommodate the maximum number of pumps that you may want to get to, but it will start with the number of pumps required to align with, say, 1 inch per hour rainfall event, you know, and then you can ramp up as you need to. Yeah.
And that 1 inch would equate to about 116 CFS.
No.
So
Right.
that closes the discharge gap.
That's a good point, yeah.
Lewis.
Thank you for coming and talking to us. I gotta tell you that listening to everything that you guys are talking about, really frustrates me incredibly. Almost 10 years ago, I was elected to council, and when I became a council member, my most important subject was resiliency and sustainability. And at that point, our storm drainage system was not working at all. It wasn't working at all. I'll tell you in a second why. But basically, I went to the manager at that time, and I said, Mr. Manager, I need a meeting between you and the Public Works Director, who at that time was the Building and Zoning Director, and gave the Building and Zoning Director some time to do some research. He went, to his credit, and did a survey of every single catch basin in the village of Key Biscayne. He found that more than 75% of our catch basins were not functioning at all. And so the catch basin is not functioning, the lines in between are not functioning, the outfalls are not functioning, the gravity wells aren't functioning. So our storm drainage system was basically not existing. And I said, what? Right, so we went to council heard it. The manager at that time didn't have the budget for what we needed in order to get going, but slowly in the next couple of years, he added some money in the budget. Instead of going out there and cleaning every single catch basin and every single outfall and every single, gravity well, they did it very, very slowly. So our storm drainage system still didn't work for years, okay? It hasn't been until the last 2 or 3 years, actually, so come forward, so, to give Steve credit on that, our Public Works Department has actually gotten a little bit busier in getting this done. Still, today, okay, my research tells me that out of the 40-something, I think it was 42 or 44, gravity wells in the village of Key Biscayne, more than half of them are plugged and not working, okay? And similarly with the outfalls. So we're, and by the way, it was me who begged the manager, who was Andrea at that time, to please consider hiring a chief resiliency officer, because I felt that everything in the village of Key Biscayne was going to require a review of resiliency. Everything from the purchasing of cars for the fire department to obviously the storm drainage. And she finally agreed to hire that person. Furthest thing from my mind was that person was going to come and propose to us that we rip out a perfectly functioning stormwater system and still within its useful life, and replace it with something that's going to cost us hundreds of millions of dollars, something that you guys can't even tell us how much it is. We're saying, oh, we're going to go out for RFQ. Well, you can't go. Yeah, I mean, the village of Key Biscayne residents, I don't think are going to let you do that. In all sincerity, okay. What we need to do right now, right, is tomorrow order that every single gravity well be cleaned before the end of the year, and every single outfall be unplugged because they're plugged, right? And even with that, our storm drainage system is working perfectly fine today. And when I say perfectly fine, I'm not saying that it won't flood for a couple of 3 hours, like, when it's raining cats and dogs and 2 or 3, 4 inches an hour, it's going to flood, right? But as soon as the rain dissipates, our gravity system works perfectly fine. Now, we're still within the useful life of that gravity system. And you guys are being brought in. I listen, with all due respect, Mr. Engineers, it's not your fault. You've been hired to come do this. It's our people's fault that we're in this situation. And that instead of making sure that our present system works to its utmost capacity, right? Instead of doing that, we decided, oh, let's just rip it out and design a new system. We have so much to do here, resiliency-wise. Our beaches are going to cost us enormous amounts of money. We have to think out of the box out there. We have to design structures off the beach. We have undergrounding should happen tomorrow. We should start the undergrounding project tomorrow. We've been talking about it for 15 years. That is what should start tomorrow. Our perfectly working the storm drainage system should not be touched until such time as it doesn't work, okay? The fact that we're designing something for 40 years from now, you're cutting something off in the middle of its useful life in order to put something else in. You know what? If you waited 15 years maybe, who knows what kind of designs would come up new in engineering? Who knows what our future would bring in terms of design? And you're adding another 15 years to the useful life of that next system that we will build one day. So, with all due respect, I'm sorry. I hope that I'm making sense to a lot of different people here. And I'm going to continue to try to do that. to every single resident of the village of Key Biscayne that I run into, because this is madness. We are on a runaway train. We need to step back, take a break, clean up our system, do everything we can to maintain what we have, look at it, inspect it, see if that's really failing, and then make the decision whether we go forward with hundreds of millions of dollars of investments, of our tax money. That's all I say.
Thank you. Yes.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about the useful life so that we can understand when everything is put in place, what the expected useful life of the current system is, how much you
Okay.
push that out?
Yeah. Before we go there, I think, look, and thank you, Lucia, and then thank you, Luis, for bringing up those comments. You know,
And just one other thing, and also, if we do something now, because we all agree on the underground, we don't want to tear the streets apart again in 10 years or 12 years. So there is a lot of sense in doing everything at once, whether it's today or 5 and 10. So can you comment on the timing?
Yeah, certainly. And look, there's a lot more to this presentation, and the mayor wanted to give people some opportunity before they went off to the yacht club tonight, so that they had an opportunity to do some comments. So I appreciate you being able to do that. So, but look, it's not an either or question, right? It's really an and. Because we are, and thank you for recognizing, Luis, that we are doing maintenance, and we're going to continue to do maintenance. Unfortunately, we're facing nature, and as Rowan showed you, I think maybe Mike did, we have a sea level rise, which is going to keep coming at us, and unfortunately, our current system will continue to degrade, and won't be able to do it. We won't be able to effectively drain our roads, but we're also facing increased rainage. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to Rowan. Why don't you give us just a little bit of background on that, and then let's talk a little bit about the stormwater system and how much we maintain it each year.
Yeah, so I'm obviously not the ultimate historian of Key Biscayne, you guys are. But what I've learned about how the system has grown is as far back as basically like the 1950s, when this area was being sort of subdivided, the way they dealt with drainage was auger wells. So these short, shallow, 10, 15-foot wells, they had them pretty much a little bit all over the place. And that's what really drained the water from the streets. Back around 1969, from like 1969 to about early 1990s, when you guys incorporated, that's when outfalls started getting put in with associated plumbing to bring water to the outfall. So it was a combination then of outfalls and shallow auger wells. And the village incorporated in 1991, 92, 1991. In 1993, Williams Hatfield Stoner did the first stormwater master plan. And in that stormwater master plan is when they recommended putting in proper drainage wells, of which 27 were put in. And those were in the 80 to 100 foot range. And so they went in around 1993, 4, 5, that period of time. And auger wells basically were sort of abandoned, but for like a few here and there. So the outfall started going in 1969, and then pretty much lasted till around 1993. So those outfalls are ranging in age of between like 30 some odd years to 55 years old. And the drainage wells that were put in around 1993, 94, 95 are now about 30 years old. Some additional drainage pipes were put in along the way, but fundamentally, we're dealing with a 30 to 55-year-old.
That's not true. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry.
Not true.
6 minutes.
This is what I've been able to determine from going through all the different stormwater master plans that I've seen. If there's more fidelity that can be offered, great. But the reality is large parts of it are undersized and are relatively old. So to say that it still has plenty of design life is, I think, stretching just a little bit. And the reality is that the environmental conditions that system was put in at are very different then than they are now, and are going to get more and more challenging. And so that's really the reason why this is being even considered. And a lot of the times when you get these biannual community surveys, the two top biggest concerns are traffic and street flooding. Okay? Every 2 years, I've seen only two of them because I've only been here for 4 years, but consistently it's been traffic and street flooding. Now, as far as what we've got and how we're using it, we do aggressively maintain the system now. As long as I've been here, starting with Jake, when I got here in 2020, we were starting to flush out, jet out, and pump out the catch basin drains in the piping 100% every year. That's kind of nuts. No municipality does that. The requirement is that you do a minimum of 10% per year. We have to do 100% per year because otherwise
Roland,
it
we're
will not
doing that.
drain.
That's not true. Why are you saying that?
I
That is
work
just
with the
not
Public
true,
Works
sir.
Director, and that's what we
Okay,
do.
well, then tomorrow
Okay?
I'm gonna ask for a freedom of information
So-
request from the
so-
village of Key Biscayne. and they're gonna
You
give
gotta
that
calm down
information.
here.
To carry
we're
on
having a
with
I
the
can't sit here and
maintenance.
listen to him, lying about
Okay,
it.
well, you obviously don't wanna have a conversation, and obviously it isn't to your liking, so you're gonna throw it away. So let's finish.
With regards to the wells themselves, of which we have 39, not 44, not 54, not 42, we got 39. We do not redevelop them every year because they don't necessarily need to be redeveloped every year. We tend to redevelop them all or rehabilitate them all once every 3 to 4 years. So in any given year, we're doing 3, 4, 5 wells per year, and then over the course of 3, 4 years, all the wells have been done. And it costs about $7,000 to pump out a well and flush it out per well, and we have 39 of them, and so, okay. So that's generally what we've been doing over the last 3, 4 years in order to be able to get them to drain to the level that they're draining. And when we still have a meaningful rain, the roadways flood out until the tide drops. And then once the tide drops, then it drains.
So if I could add, Mr. Mayor, if I could. So, last Friday, I went to a meeting with Mayor Cava, and it wasn't just me and Mayor Cava, it was the entire county. She asked every municipality to come together and talk about the flooding that we're facing across the county. And as you all know, it's pretty significant. And it was partially in response to the flooding that I think you all heard. Aventura got 17 inches of rain earlier this year. I think we ended up getting about 4.5 or something like that. But look, the county can no longer handle this, right? And so they are now coming up with what we used to have hurricane response plans. They're coming up with flood response plans because people are beginning to get in jeopardy to a life safety issue that they've got to put this in place. Also, at the same meeting, they talked about stormwater system maintenance, of course, which is what we're doing, but also how do we upgrade these systems to take on the increase of water and also sea level rise that we're seeing. At this point, we are the envy of the county. They see and look at us because we actually have a plan. And we're pointed out all the time as the example of how to very deliberately take this through a process. And that's what we're trying to show you tonight as we walk through. And there's a little bit more that we're going to show you, but I just want to add that in because this is something that the entire county is trying to address.
Myra.
Thank you, Mayor. Roland, just as a little bit of redirect, because I have the institutional knowledge. I've lived here for over 30 years, and I served on council for 8 during a phase where we initiated a lot of this you're bearing fruit now. But I would say that, I think nuance is important, and we incorporated in 1991 because we did not have things like proper storm water drainage. And so to say that we've been relying on that system, and throw out the 1950s, 60s as it's something that we rely on now.
No.
Well, but that's how it comes across. I'm telling you what I heard.
Okay.
Is, I think, a little troubling. We did start our first of many stormwater master plans in 1993. We implemented them. Most of the system is about 15 years old from my understanding. There have been vast improvement, and so I think there's so many nuances. I think people need to know that it's not a 1950s. I've seen on chats, oh, the system is 1950s, 60s, 70s. That is absolutely, and so for the misinformation, that is not true. Our system, we are the envy of the county. We do not have the flooding that you have in downtown Miami when you have these. We still need to do more. We've had a big problem with Zone 1 for as long as I can remember. We've been trying to get Zone 1 done for at least 10 years. I think we all recognize, and when you get the flooding and you have people picking up and dropping off at school,
Right.
that is really the critical part where people complain about flooding, because it is, I think, specific to that zone. So let's, the sky is not falling. We can always do better. We should focus on Zone 1. I don't think it's this, I would be disappointed if we take this opportunity to fearmonger into over engineering to a point where it's hundreds of millions of dollars that is maybe not needed. And I think that's why people are concerned. We've always been very good, very responsible about doing thoughtful, aggressive, but incremental change. We are only, 8,000 households that pay taxes. So hundreds of millions of dollars has a huge effect on a few number of taxpayers. So while we want to move ahead, and Zone 1 is a problem, and Zone 1 has been the #1 problem for 10 years, let's get it done, but let's also be thoughtful and considerate and put out the information that is needed, because that is why you have people that are upset.
We're in agreement.
Let me tap on this. So Myra, I'm actually glad you said it, because you must have gone forward in the slides, and maybe I didn't explain it, earlier on, but.
Then get to that point.
Yeah, we are. So, no, we want to give you guys an opportunity to chime in. So that's in fact exactly what we're going to do. And we're going to show you, we're going to move forward on Zone 1, and then we're going to have an opportunity to pause, take a look, monitor what happened. There's some folks who said that we may actually have maybe a bathtub effect where we'll actually get some benefits, maybe to the north, to the south. So this is not a runaway train. This is not moving. We have an opportunity to make decisions very deliberately, step by step. But yes, we all know Zone 1 needs to be addressed, and we're moving forward to
And
address
where's
it.
the fourth outfall? You haven't revealed that.
No, we're working on it, yes.
Okay,
Let-
okay.
Let me get Pepe and then Carlos.
I didn't want to get involved, but I was involved in starting, if you wish. It wasn't starting, but I got to manage the stormwater utility of the village as a consultant. And when I started, the village hasn't collected $450,000 in fees. So nobody was watching what it was done. We were paying for cleaning the pipes, but the pipes weren't getting clean. They cleaned the catch basin and that was it. We didn't have a GIS system. We had to build a GIS system.
What years are you talking about, Pepe?
2012. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, more or less. When we finished the water and sewer project, I ran out of work, and then
The septic to sewer.
Putting in the sewer line.
the septic tank,
Putting in the sewer line.
Septic to sewer.
eliminating the septic,
Eliminating septic.
which was how I got hired, and I just retired from Durham. I was the water and sewer supervisor of Durham, and I oversee all these constructions. So what I'm saying, I've been involved in this for many years. And most of these things that you have said here is true, it's fact. But it's not what we think is being done, is to inspect and get it really done. Paying is not is not a solution. It's doing it. And right now, I think we are blessed. We had a good stormwater maintenance person, which cleans the pipes and calls NATA to verify that the pipes were clean. Some pipes we couldn't go through because they were cut during the water and sewer project. Not many, but some, they were in the plans, but not in the fact. So, and that has to be maintained. The wells weren't maintained, okay? And we established our new guys here.
CRO, yeah.
The
Dr.
memory,
Samimi,
I mean,
yeah.
the memory is not
That's
mine.
okay. I remember you.
Okay, and it's clean every 4 years. Everything is clean. It's redeveloped.
Yeah.
Because those wells need to be redeveloped when they plug. There are ways to check it, to see if they're full. There is a lot of things that have been developed through the years.
Yeah.
Through the years. This is not something that was started yesterday, and it's something that has never, it's not going to end soon either. So I wish that everything is done well and at the lowest price.
Yes.
Because we fail to do things for not spending money. And that was because every improvement in the enterprise of a stormwater utility was supposed to come from the fees collected. And we collected, it's half of what we collect now. But some were not collected because nobody was overseeing. I don't know if this is the case, but I strongly suggest that somebody is assigned to overlook this operation, because this is very complex and it's everything on the ground. You don't see it.
Right.
You only see when it floods.
Fortunately, we do. Because we have someone who's in charge of doing the NPDES MS4 permit filing that we have to do every year. So we've been actually tracking all of this stuff very carefully, at least since I've been here. I can't speak for before that, but as long as I've been here, every year we submit a detailed report of all the maintenance that's been done, and we've got someone who's like dedicated to tracking all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. When I started here, there was not even an Excel program to follow what you.
Well, there is now, and it's all in GIS and all that. So thank you for getting the whole GIS
So anyway,
set
yeah,
up.
so and Pepe, you've got our commitment. I take maintenance extremely seriously. Our Public Works Director, our CRA, takes it very seriously. Our CFO takes the funding of this very seriously. You're exactly right, and we're doing exactly what you're asking us to do. So we appreciate you bringing that up.
I'm supplying this as a covering part of the story that I lived. Nobody told me. This what I'm telling is a witness. So, and I'm glad to share with anybody and share in all directions.
We'd love to. I don't know where my new Public Works Director is. He's hiding around here, but I'm going to introduce him. He's right behind you, right there. Go talk to that man.
Carlo. No.
Go talk to that man, Chris.
My name is Carlos Cotto, and I have lived here for 50 years or more, okay? And one thing that I know is that everybody who lives here has their heart, his heart, her heart, in the best for Key Biscayne. Whatever your position is, for most of us, it's not an ulterior motive or another agenda. Now, with that said, I remember the days when we wanted to have our own Village of Key Biscayne Fire Department, and there were people who did not want us to have our own. They wanted to have their Miami-Dade County to continue to supply us with that need. At that time, I remember a fun senior lady, now I'm probably at that age, but she said, "I cannot believe you're so stupid," and we still respected each other. Camille, ¿te acuerdas? Because we both had the best intentions at heart. Now, with this said, regarding the system and section 1 and zone 1, etc., my first house here was on Woodcrest, right by the school. That was considered section 1. That street flooded, and the street became impassable. The way to school was just horrible, and it remained so for days. All right, it did not dry for days. You're talking about section 1 that needs to be done. Well, now I have, when it rains, and when it rains like it has rained in the past few days, I drive by. My daughter lives in that zone, and I drive by that zone. And contrary to what you are saying, I noticed that those streets are not badly flooded. They can flood, there's water a few hours, but if you go there a few hours after, those streets are dry. Do we really need to spend hundreds of millions of dollars like you're proposing in all of that? Something else that, I have another question here. Can that be what he was pointing out, that the catch basins were not functioning, and that now the catch basins are functioning, that they are being properly maintained? Because I have noticed, not only in section 1, but I have noticed throughout Key Biscayne, that our streets dry much faster. And I would like for you to explain what you mean by aggressively, the system being aggressively maintained. I believe that the system can be better maintained and be optimized. Whoever is doing it is doing a good job. But I think that improving on that system that still has life expectancy of about 15 more years, that we can do that and we can save some money. Additionally, okay.
Thank you for your question. Who wants to?
So I'll start with what I mean by aggressively maintain. Municipalities in general, across the board, do not pump out the catch basins, all their catch basins, and jet out all of their pipes 100% every year. They just don't, because it's too costly. Okay, we do that. Every year, we pump out all the catch basins and we jet out the lines. And in some catch basins, we do it more than once per year because they don't all accumulate sediments at the same rate. So that's what I mean by aggressively maintain. Aggressively maintain would be deciding.
Optimum maintenance or just
No, that's not optimum maintenance. That is aggressive maintenance. Okay? Rehabilitating the wells, all the wells, every year would be extremely aggressive maintenance. We do not do that. We don't do that because it's costly to do that, and they don't fill up with sediments that fast.
Can you maybe differentiate for people who aren't, the difference between catch basin and well?
Okay,
and
sure.
what you mean by line? I think if we're all using the same definitions,
Okay.
it might be helpful.
So water flows from drains to catch basins, and from catch basins, they flow to wells, to drainage wells. Okay, so it's a series of collection mechanisms. You have curb inlet grates. Okay, in curbs, you have these curb cuts that take water, and then you have catch basins. Okay, all right. So we do not redevelop and rehabilitate all the wells every year. No one does. It's expensive and it's unnecessary because the wells do not fill up with sediments that fast. So we typically do 3 to 5 wells per year, and then over the course of 3 or 4 years, we end up doing all the wells.
Roland, quick question. How much, did you say $7,000 to do that? each
Yeah,
well?
right now we
That's
pay
$84,000 a year.
we pay $7,000 to rehabilitate a well,
Okay,
which is
so-
suck out the sediments and flush a little bit of water through it, and then that's it.
So at the most expensive for 39 wells, we would be paying about $273,000 a year
Yeah,
if we
in two-
wanted to do
in
all of them.
2010, you guys contracted Jaffer Drilling, and they rehabilitated all the wells that existed at that time, and it was about a $278,000 contract to do that.
So if the council wanted today, because obviously this project takes a very long time to get started and get in the zones, but if we wanted to bring our system to more optimal, we can increase, instead of doing 3 or 4 a year, we can increase that to doing half a year or 25% a year or 100% a year.
You
We
can
could
do
that,
whatever
right?
you choose to spend the money on. You can
Okay.
do 100% if you wanted to. That's your decision, that's not up to me.
But you've also
It would
said
be
that
a
it's
bit of a
unnecessary.
waste of money because the wells do not fill up with sediments that fast. So I
But at
wouldn't
what
recommend it,
At
but
what percent do you think our current system is working with only cleaning 3?
I couldn't tell you.
Can our
Yeah.
engineers tell us if we ask them that question? Can they model and tell us like this is what you have going on right now?
I don't know that the AECOM model
So
can
yeah,
do
the,
that.
the AECOM model is based on the existing systems that's out there. You could do inspection of each and every pipe and every manhole just to see what the condition is.
Because
The reality is, though, I'm gonna
Yeah.
add, Brett, that the reality is that these are gravity drainage wells. We are losing hydraulic gradient year to year, okay?
understand.
Gravity is only gonna do so much. When the water table is high and is like right pretty much at the top of the well, you've got no hydraulic head to drive that discharge, drive that drainage. So what happens is to create head, the water accumulates on the street. Now you have the weight of the water that could start moving the water that is in the well. Okay, so as much as you redevelop these wells, they're losing drainage capacity year to year. And they already have pretty little drainage capacity because you just don't have that much hydraulic head.
I get it, but
So-
I'm not talking about the future projects. I'm talking about what we have right now.
That's what I'm telling you right now.
I understand that. But what I'm asking is that when we did the engineering models, we're always looking at our existing system in 2060 or 2070 with a 30-inch sea level rise. I don't think we've ever seen the model of our existing system today. And when you look at the existing system,
You do.
Yeah.
They've done that. They've
Yeah,
done
we have done
existing
that.
conditions.
Okay,
we
but
can-
in the graphs that you gave us of how much water would sit on the street and how long it takes to drain in a 10-year, 24-hour storm, I have not seen that number for what it is today.
We have done it. We can send it again.
Yeah.
Send that to me.
We have.
And then the second question that I have is that when you do that modeling, is that at optimal level of our gravity system, or is that at working at 75%? Because I'm guessing you must incorporate that there's a cleaning effect and there's clogging effects and things happening. How do you guys model that?
So the model incorporates, you're correct, it incorporates a feature on how efficient you want it to be, and you could tweak it. So right now we have been doing it at optimal condition, but based on data, let's say we deploy a crew, we inspect each and every pipe, and then we get a report back and saying 50% of the pipes are clogged or are not working, then we could adjust it and see what happens.
All
But
right,
you
so
will
let
just
me,
see more flooding.
let me clarify what you just said. So the modeling that you did under existing conditions, like the existing condition model, and the ponding that the model results generated was with the system operating optimally.
Optimally.
Okay, and so those results were already pretty dramatic
Right.
with the system operating optimally.
Yes, in zone one with the optimal system, you had like 3 days of flooding.
Yeah,
In
which is
what
pretty
year?
cons-
Because the year that you gave
No,
us with 3
no,
days of flooding was
we-
in 2060.
So we will
No.
send you the one for today as well.
Yeah, we
So
did it.
We
they
will do
did-
it for you.
They
because
did
in
the
2060, we're talking about
No, they did
30
the
Yeah.
they
inches
did
and
the
more water.
existing condition model
Okay.
with events that are occurring today. not-
Right.
But you're getting the same amount of time as you're getting in 2060
It's-
with 97 hours?
You get like 10 more hours or something like that. Because the problem is, council member, is the ability of us to discharge the water out with the water level coming up and the system being driven by gravity. It's like you have a choke at the end. So it's not so much of the pipes in the street is getting it out. So you had a bottleneck, and that's the problem.
But in the last 5 years, we've had
Can I ask a
2
question?
storms above 10-year storms. I have not seen water in the street for 97 hours. I haven't seen that. In figures, I don't understand if your model's actually looking at what's actually happening.
So
There's
we
something
have
disconnected.
done calibration. There were a couple of storms. I think like 3 of them, and we calibrated the model. Roland and the public works crew, they were measuring the depth of flooding and the time, and the model was able to replicate that. So yeah, we did do the calibration of the model, and we can send the calibration storms as well, because those are very good. Because when you see the calibration storm, you have the actual data and you can compare.
That's what actually gives you confidence that the model is working.
Yeah.
That's why you do calibration runs.
But in the 2 storms that we've had, we didn't see the 97% or 97 hours or whatever it is, or 87 hours it was to drain. And at the same time, your system and your model is optimal at 100%, and we know our system's not at 100% because we're not cleaning everything every 2 minutes. So I don't understand how your model is showing longer and what we're actually seeing is much shorter.
So it's not really that we're showing longer or shorter. We have calibrated the model and the results are accurate. So we could show you by storm. Instead of talking about theoretical, we can put side by side what really happened and one of the storms on how the model did it, so that we can clarify that. Because if we don't pin it down to an actual storm, then we don't really know.
Because you have different rates, different hours, how much it's
Right.
going down.
So that's why it's better to send you a calibration storm and compare with actual measurements from the field, which we have, and then the model, and then that's a good comparison.
All right, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, we'll send that.
Okay, I think, council member, I think one of the things that I said it before, I want to say it's clear, is that, this is not an either or. This is an and so we're going to continue to do maintenance. We're going to keep driving on. What we're here tonight, and why I put this slide back up, is really just to give a presentation on Zone 1. We're not talking about Zone 8. We're not talking about Zone 7. This is not a runaway train. We're here to talk about one zone. We've had a couple folks in the crowd who realize this is what we need to tackle. So we're not tackling the entire village. We're going after Zone 1 right now, as we continue to, as Roland said, aggressively do our maintenance across the
Hold on a minute. Ed, are you on?
No, yeah, I am, just listening. I have a question to Roland. Roland, I don't understand, maybe you can explain to me what the water table has to do with the gravity fade on the underground stream at a gravity well.
I couldn't hear.
The higher.
Can you repeat?
You wanted to know what the deal is with the water table and what that has to do with drainage?
With gravity.
With the gravity well.
Yeah. So the water, the depth of the water, the depth of the groundwater table defines how much hydraulic gradient you have. Now, hydraulic gradient is basically the difference from high to low. Water doesn't flow uphill, and it doesn't like to flow when it's flat. So if the water table is really low and the water on the road is higher than the water table, it will flow like a ball rolling downhill. If the water table is at the level of the road, there's no slope, so the water can't really flow. So it has to pond up higher to have a little bit of a slope, a little bit of a pressure head. That's your hydraulic gradient, and that's what ultimately ends up making the water flow out the bottom of the well.
Yeah. So basically, the well is cased. So therefore, the water table should not affect the hydraulic gradient, because the water is like a tube. And basically, if the tube goes down to the underground stream, for lack of a better term, it shouldn't be affected one way or the other by the water table.
No, that's just incorrect. The water table, the depth of the water table is your hydraulic gradient, okay? If the water table is at the land surface, you've got no slope, you've got no gradient. When the water table drops below the land surface, you start having a hydraulic gradient, and water can flow. If the water were 30 feet below the land surface, you'd have a much larger hydraulic gradient than if the groundwater table is at the land surface. It's really that straightforward. Water will not flow on a flat surface. It needs a little bit of a slope Just the way a ball won't really roll on a flat surface, it needs a little bit of a slope. That's your hydraulic gradient.
Okay,
the table, the well.
I have to go, you know, I mean, I either get it to
Hold
do
on,
or.
Lucio, I have a question before you.
All right, so it's okay, I gotta.
It's really hard to hear if everybody's talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I finish,
Not
please?
only you,
Pat,
Patricia Romano. My
Well,
question
basically, Roland.
is, what is the size of the pump that you're gonna put in the park?
The
Can I
pump
finish with my
station is going to
question?
have the ability to pump at 160 cubic feet per
No,
second.
the size, dimensions.
Oh, the dimensions of the vault
Yes.
that the pumps are in?
Whatever, yeah, what is the structure?
Well, Pat,
The structure
we're
is
not
all
ready to,
underground.
we're gonna come
Oh,
to you
okay.
in September to give you
Yeah,
kind of a
we're
layout
gonna
of
give
what
a
it is. Yes.
detailed
It's gonna be
presentation.
underground?
We're gonna
Yeah,
give a
majority of it's gonna
detailed
be underground.
presentation on that, but the
The
vast
majority
majority,
of
all
it
the
is, yeah.
pumps are gonna be underground.
Okay, good. Thank you.
one last thing, and we're, all right, Pablo, and then we gotta move on,
This is a technical observation.
okay?
The water in the wells, and we have measured, this goes about 75% of the elevation of the water in the ocean. Okay, they're connected, but they're not automatic. You know, they have to go through a filter, the rock and so forth, and it's about 75%. When you got, let's say, 2 feet in the ocean, you got only 150 in the well.
Okay. Pablo, and then we're gonna keep going.
Yeah, I just had three questions. The estimated timeline per zone. I noticed that you subdivided different zones.
Yeah, we don't have timelines per zone. Right now, we're just focused on zone
No,
1, and we
timeline.
have a timeline for zone 1. We don't have a timeline
Roland,
for
that's
the
right
other.
up there.
Right. So that's the timeline for zone 1 that extends into 2028.
That's
Zone
when we probably break ground, right?
Yeah, after we break down. After we
Okay,
break ground,
okay.
sometime around the end of the calendar year 2025, beginning of 2026, then
Okay.
we anticipate going into probably 2028 for the complete construction of Zone 1. Beyond that, we have no timeline.
Okay, perfect. Two more questions. It'll be simple. What areas are most needed, or where you guys, saw a weakness in the drainage?
So, I mean, without a doubt, Zone 1. That's
Okay.
why we started.
Zone 1?
And Zone 1 was essentially selected before I even started, mainly because, and I don't want to put words into other people's mouths, but mainly because it was the school, it was a safety issue. A lot of people in the community have kids
Okay.
that end up engaging at that school. So there was a lot of attention there, and the inundation there was particularly bad.
Okay.
Beyond that, there are other areas to the north of Zone 1 and a little bit to the south of Zone 1. And there's Holiday Colony, that's also pretty bad. There's Ocean Lane Drive, that's also pretty bad. There's Garden District, that's also pretty bad. Mashta Islands, not
Okay.
so much. Northern part of Zone 2 around Harbor Drive and the churches and stuff like that is not so bad.
Okay, perfect.
So we're not really focused beyond those areas, but the program that we've structured, framed up,
What's your last
enables us to
last question?
understand all these
Last
elements.
question, real quick. As far as the numbers.
Yes.
For the condo residents, are you gonna break it down by square footage or by number of units?
When you say break it down, are you talking about cost?
Yeah, as far as the cost.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that as
Yeah,
we
we
go
have-
on. It's
we
in
have
this
a slide on
presentation.
that.
Yeah, as we go further, we'll be able to break that down.
Just let me add one thing, because I've said it in this very room months ago. I think that our council is focused on Zone 1 and Zone 1 only, and beyond that, which is a few years from happening, we're trying to make it happen. We have not committed to 300, 400, 500 million, all these numbers that keep getting thrown out there. They are not part of what we're doing. We're trying to solve a problem for the school and our kids that's persisted for many, many years. So that's our focus. And after that, we'll have to look and see whether or not we need to keep going or we need to do other things that are just as important in resiliency. So with that, let's continue.
Can I try just a conceptual takeaway from this conversation, just to try to put a fine point on what's been discussed?
Sure.
And test what I think we've heard and learned and come to believe through multiple gut checks. That is, without regard to whatever the useful life is of the system as it is right now, the system as built is disconnected from each other, doesn't support each other in different realms, and so is intrinsically less efficient than we think it should be. Second point, that the reliance on the gravity system, although we all observe that it's improved, and we think that the improvement is because of the extraordinary maintenance that I think you've described, is not a perfectly functional system for the period of time we're dealing with. I think that was part of the gut check that we've revisited multiple times. And the third point is that if we're going to deal with an improvement, starting with phase one, the lead time associated with the design, the financing, the contracting, and the development doesn't permit passivity and delay, because we'll never get there. That's maybe an exaggeration, but so passivity and acquiescence of the system as it is, because it takes so long, and focusing only on phase one, and yes, it's complex, but yes, we're moving along, but reliance on the system that exists now with the conclusion that it's perfectly tenable for the future that we need it to be, we think is fallacious. And we've revisited that thoughtfully, I think, many times, and keep coming up with the same conclusion. That's just not a reliable premise.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Let's keep going so that we can get through most of this presentation.
All right, thank you,
Did I
Mr.
say anything incorrect?
No, you're right on. I don't know about acquiescence and passivity, but you're right. So we're ready to move forward.
They are great words, though.
They are, I like it. So there is no passivity
I like
going on.
fallacious also.
But no, I think you nailed it right on the head there, Councilman. Thank you. So just exactly what the mayor said before, this is just talking about zone one, right? And so we're gonna move forward, talk about zone one, talk a little bit about the costs, and then we're gonna step in right after that is the decision-making cycle that we're gonna be able to use in order to decide where we wanna go next. So we'll have another one of these. We'll have an opportunity to have this conversation, whether it's zone two, whether it's not zone two, whether it's Ocean Lane Drive. So I just wanna make sure it's clear, and we'll get to it later, that we're gonna talk about just about zone one. So Mike, let's walk us through. We already talked about that. We talked about the details. We talked about the outfalls. Why don't you just give just a quick update, because I know you want to talk to council about your ability to go deeply into this, this project.
Absolutely. So one of the things we did is we built a baseline schedule for zone one. We included everything from funding to permitting to procurement, construction and engineering. Everything is linked to each other. We talked about this pretty much at length, but that is one of the tools that we now have at our disposal that we built in the past few months so that we can make better decisions. We can aid in whether or not we're behind schedule, ahead of schedule, whether there's a deadline that we need to come to, which will help us mitigate any kind of missed items and will help mitigate costs as well.
So what I want to do now, we're going to step into talking about the zone as an investment, and I think you all talked about the importance of ensuring that our village is safe and secure in terms of flooding. So what this is kind of gives you the number portion of what Mike talked about earlier from the vulnerability assessment. So Mike, why don't you go ahead and walk us through the numbers you have up there?
Absolutely. So we did a little bit of research on zone one property values with the tax data that we had and actual just value. So we came up with about $1.57 billion. We're going to get into the budget in a little bit, but basically what we're looking at is about a 4.5% investment into this zone. Per our previous slides and economic modeling, that comes to about a 5-to-1 damage avoidance of about $400 million for this zone. Understanding that these are not exact numbers and that this is for stormwater specifically, So that's not surge or wind, but we'll get a little bit of benefits for that as well. Also, understand that this is a conservative modeling that we did, and it's still very strong numbers. So there's a lot of positive movement with especially this zone.
So again, so we want to make sure we're focusing on an investment, but I also want to make sure that we talk about the cost as well. So Eric and Roland, why don't you walk us through, the cost of this program or this zone?
Okay.
And where we want to move forward.
So for this update, we've basically broken down the projected budget for Zone 1 into 4 different components. You have this pre-construction and design component, which is fundamentally what we're in right now. Fortunately, we're on track, on budget, on schedule for this element of the budget. So back in August of 2023, we'd anticipated that it was about 5.7 million. Right now, we're hovering around 6.3 million because we had a whole raft of additional modeling that was done, and also we built in a little 5% contingency in there because along the way there are requests for doing some additional analyses and additional designing here and there. That element is on track, okay? So we're happy with that. Back in August of 2023, we came up with our first projected budget estimate for the stormwater piece alone of Zone 1, and that was 35.9 million. Right now, because of inflation at around 8%, we're around 38.1, 38.9, okay? So that's just for the stormwater piece, okay? And that's kind of like your base scope. Now, at the time that we were doing these original estimates, we didn't have any idea as to what our discharge capacity was going to be and where we would ultimately be discharging, whether we'd be able to discharge it all into Zone 1 or if we had to move water out of Zone 1. So we couldn't really come up with a good estimate on that, but we've got that now. And we've also been able to estimate the force mains that we would need to go from the pump station to the outfalls. So we've got that now. When we take that into consideration, that was about 5.8. So that would be added to the 38.9, okay? Then we had to make a decision on how we would rebuild the roadways. And so there was a traditional way to do it, and then there was a more robust way that includes what's called a black base, so that the roadway has a little bit more stability given the rising groundwater conditions. And also with a black base, you wouldn't have to raise the road nearly as much, would then alleviate some of the challenge that we have, or that we'll be facing with harmonizing the roadway to a private property through the right-of-way. So by making a decision to go with a black base on the roadways, we add another 1.4. So when you take the 1.4, the 5.8, and the 38.9, and you add them together, you're essentially at like 46.1. 46.1 million for the stormwater component. Now, our first estimate was 35.9. So we're pretty close. We're actually really close if you don't add the black base on the roadway and you didn't have the outfalls and the force mains. Okay, so we're excited about that because the estimating looks like it's actually working pretty well, and we've gotten AECOM to talk to the vendors, to the suppliers, to get material costs and all that stuff. So we feel really good.
Councilmember Moss's question.
Oh yeah, okay.
I just wanted to ask to Frank, Allison, and Joe. I'm a little confused by this because I believe that when we were discussing the 2 inches per hour to 1 inch per hour, it was 34 point some million dollars for the 2 inch per hour. To go down to the 1 inch was like 26 or whatever it was. There was a difference we were looking at. I had no idea that the outfalls, did you guys know that this was an additional fee that was going to be on top of what we were looking at? I thought that 34 point something million dollars was the cost of the stormwater system. Now we're looking at that's going up to 38, but oh yeah, now we know about our outfalls and our force mains. That's an additional $5.8 million on it. I thought that's what we were debating between those two prices. I'm a little bit confused where that came from. Unless I totally missed something, but that's not how I remembered our discussions out there 2 months ago.
Let's do a memory test. The question started with, it basically correlated with diameter of piping, right?
Diameter of piping and size of the pump station. Okay, so it was like, okay, are you going to design for a 1 inch per hour event or a 2 inch per hour event? Okay, and there was a whole long discussion as to what would be the best way to go. Okay, at that time when we were having that discussion, we didn't know where that water was going to go. Some of that water might have had to gone north to zone 2. Some of the water might have needed to go to zone 3. We didn't have an ability to estimate the price of the force mains because we didn't know how much force main we would need, and we didn't know if we'd have a big dissipator structure and an extra outfall, or we have the 3 same outfalls that we have. So that, you know, that's a point of clarification that needs to needs to be.
I get that.
Understood.
But my understanding is that when we're talking about $34 million, that's your estimate of the project. Whether you know where it's going or not, there's some force main cost, there's some pump cost in that $34 million. It was never told to us, we're excluding that because we don't know anything about that. We're only going to show you everything up to the pump, and then later on we'll tell you what the pump and the force mains are going to be. No, that's not how I understood it.
Well, I mean,
because then you're giving us prices.
The pumps are in the base
pumps,
cost.
yeah.
I've had conversations with the engineers about the price of pumps. I've seen the numbers, and this is how much it comes out.
Yeah.
2 months later, now you're saying our base price, our base scope, which didn't include before when we told you, did not include the new outfalls, the force mains. So today we're telling you that it just went up by 8%, but oh yeah, we're throwing another 5.8 on top of that.
The 8% is inflation. That's just straight inflation.
I understand
you know?
the inflation, but what I'm saying is that if it was included in that original base scope, there's money in there. So really, the new outfalls and force mains are actually a lot larger than what they thought it was going to be. It's very confusing because when we're making policy decisions up there, and these are very serious decisions, and we're not being told numbers, or we're not being told that, hey, that number's not included, we're going to come back later because we don't know what it is. We need to know that when we're making a decision up there. And now when I see this, I'm like, where did this number just come from? Where did 6 million, 5.8 million plus another 1 point? We hadn't discussed that. And this is just a stormwater, and that's what we were discussing. So again, I had just not read something, didn't understand something, but I don't know if my colleagues here, did you understand that they were excluding a whole chunk while we were making a decision and that this was going to be something they were going to bring back? I understand they might have not known what it was, and it might be more than what they thought. I get that. But I had no idea that this was not included in the price when we're making policy decisions.
Memory is fallible, but let me try this. The conclusion that I think we all came to was that it was highly desirable to be able to get the easements that were proximate to to Heather, basically.
Correct.
Heather and McIntyre.
Correct.
And that the cost savings that would be projectable if we were able to have such short linear feet to be able to get to an outfall was important for cost, number one. And number two, and this was a wide open variable at the time, I think, depending on what we could achieve by way of dissipators embedded in seawalls, other important cost factor. So my memory is that all I think we came to was that it was going to be highly desirable to make it so by being close. But I don't remember relying on a solid estimate because of those contingencies.
That's correct, because I mean we couldn't estimate them because we didn't know where we were going to be putting the water. We didn't know how many outfalls, what size dissipator structures, how many linear feet of force main. So
yeah, I think the
the discussion was really on the pump station and the conveyance.
And the big debate that I recall more clearly was this dimension is $8 million more expensive than that dimension.
Correct.
Yeah, I have the same memory. And while I understand it, you don't know what something's going to cost when you don't know what it is. It is not my recollection that when we were debating about decisions we were going to make because of an all-in number, I don't remember thinking, but wait, I got to leave a certain sizable chunk for the unknown, right? And as Brett said, you know, maybe it was said, maybe we missed it, but it wasn't operating that way. I do think it's a lot more money. And with inflation additional, which again, you can't control that, and nobody is saying that you hid the fact that there's inflation in the world from us. But at the end of the day, the lump sum total is a big, big number, getting bigger, feels by the second. So,
But do you understand what I'm
Yes.
saying? Because this base cost really was a lot lower because they
Yes.
separated it out, right? So we're
Well,
not
it wasn't-
comparing apples to apples anymore.
or perhaps we just didn't we weren't operating with the same original sets of terms and definitions. My assumption was this was the project.
Look, if we did not understand this is a fault of the administration, our engineers, for not telling us. Because I've had so many meetings, I mean, so much time. There's no way that I could not have understood that. If it was, it's a broken of communication. Because how we are looking at this now, this original base scope was 35, but it didn't include something. We would have to have known that. Or you're going to have to say that base scope, we're going to take it out. So the base scope back 2 months ago was actually 29, and today it's this, and we had to pull this out to show you. I mean, that's how you're going to have to.
If I could, so if you want to do the apples to apples, it's the thing across the top. So those numbers look like it's an old slide, but it's 35 to 38 on the slides we have. The one at the bottom is the addition of the black base, and I think Rowan explained why we can, and that's obviously a decision we can make, whether we do it, whether we don't.
Right.
And then, so if those two are given, and I think you understand that, so I think where you're looking at is in the middle, the new outfalls and the force mains, the 5.8. That's where you're having the question, correct?
Well, I'm saying that when you presented the base scope 2 months ago, my understanding is that you guys were already calculating a cost. It may not have been the cost, but there was a cost of outfalls.
No, but I just want to make sure. So you
Yeah,
understand
the
the top on the top and you understand the bottom.
Yeah.
So what you're looking, the questions which are in the middle, the 5.8 million.
Yes.
Eric, okay,
The
so why
5.8
don't
and the 35. Yes, those two right there.
35.
This 35.997?
Yeah, that was the base scope.
So that was the base scope.
Yeah.
But there
Yeah.
was something you're telling me now that when you gave us that base scope 2 months ago.
I've got you. So all I want to say is, you see, we're doing apples to apples on the top. So it's 35 to 38. That's the increase with the inflation. The bottom is the black base. That's a decision we can make.
I
Yes
got
or no.
that, yeah.
So what you're asking is, so where does 5.8 million come?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. So Eric,
uh,
why don't you walk through exactly
yes.
how we got to those additional?
Yeah, so Councilmember Moss, the disconnect is that we had to explain to you. So the base scope is the existing outfalls. So using the existing outfalls and rehabilitating them, then you have the inflation. But the added value is that we're also other than also closing the discharge deficit in Zone 1, now we're providing additional capacity in the zone for Zone 3. So that is something additional. So when you look at the base scope, we were including back in August of 2023 what we have, which was certain, which was the 3 existing outfalls.
Okay.
But what changed now in August of 2024, the village was able to secure, and we're working on getting a new and big location where now we're not just closing the entire Zone 1 deficit, but we're also bringing forth additional capacity for Zone 3. So we had the discussion with Steve and Roland, and we said, should these costs be allocated for Zone 3? Because it has some logic that we could maybe divide it. But we said, and I remember Roland and Steve make the determination, since we're going to build it now, then that cost needs to be captured within Zone 1. But you could argue that maybe half of that money could be for Zone 3 because it's additional capacity for Zone 3, which wasn't before.
So that Zone 1 that would be in here, did you originally have that calculated 2 months ago when we were making these decisions? That's my question, because then you
That's in
have
the 35.9.
you have to
In the-
remove it
yeah.
from the 35 base scope and bring it down here so we can understand that originally this was our price, but we have this thing that we're going to be doing together. So I have to take some of it of what we were estimating in our base scope when we made the decision. We have to take that out and move it over here because we're going to do it together. But you can't say the base scope is still that amount. But we're also adding it here.
So when
you're doing
when
it twice.
I
You
think
know?
there's a little bit of confusion. The new outfall number is the single new outfall. It's not encapsulated.
Yes,
all
but
of the outfalls.
can I take a stab at this, Brett? The question that's coming to me from what Brett's saying is, you knew when you gave the base scope that you needed to close the deficit for Zone 1. I completely understand that a lot of this outfall, especially when we saw earlier, the outfall capacity far exceeds what's necessary for Zone 1. I think more than
Yeah.
half is available for Zone 3,
Yeah.
which is great, and I understand that that is a legitimate incremental cost. But the question is, when you gave the original base scope in August of 36, really, was there a number included in that to address closing the deficit for Zone 1? And if so, why hasn't that number come out and been added to this? And if not, why not? Or why wasn't there an asterisk and a big, hey guys, we don't know how much it's going to cost, but this, it could be a big number, it could be a small number. These are our ballparks that we're thinking. Is that where you were going, Brett?
Exactly. And now I start to ask the question to myself, what else is an asterisk that you guys aren't telling us that we're going to see in 3 months? And you're going to say, oh yeah, we didn't include that. So here you go, right? So when you do this one time, you start to think, here it comes, right? What's the next
Yeah,
one?
Let's
You
get
need
the
be
answer
upfront
to
us.
that. Can we get
I'll-
the answer to, was there a number included in there?
So yeah, I'll clarify. So the number from the base scope from August of 2023, yeah, that was when we completed the basis of design report. So that was planning level. We had said we're going to have rehabilitate the existing outfalls. In the future, though, you will need to close the discharge deficit. But at the time, there was uncertainty on, we had a different level of service as well. So we were working with the staff and council to see what is it that we were going to do. So the decision was made, let's take a step back, let's reanalyze the level of service. And by the way, let's work on securing that deficit that we have. So we work on that. Now with the capacity that we have and having 30% design documents, we evolve. So the cost that you see from August of 2023, from the American Association of Cost Engineers, that was considered like a class 5, so it's like the first level of planning. But now coming in to the August of 2024 number, we evolve from an early class 5 to an intermediate class 3 estimate. That means that we're narrowing down on the uncertainty. So with the number that you're seeing now, it's not like we're going to come back to you in when we have it in December and tell you, oh no, by the way, we need 20% more. No, what's going to happen now is from there, when we come back to you in December, we're going to come back with a class 2 estimate, and then the contingency there will be between 10 and 15%. Then when we do the 90% cost estimate in March, and then the 100% estimate in May, we will go to 5% contingency and then no contingency. So the contingency that you had at the planning level, what you do when you have uncertainty, you assign contingency to it. So that's why we had the 35% contingency plus some escalation. Then moving from the class 5 low definition to the class 3, okay, we have a lot of definition. We still carry some contingency, 25% contingency. But as we move forward, the contingency will materialize into additional scope and reduction of contingency.
To clarify the answer specifically, Allison, the original base scope did have some amount in it
For rehab, yeah.
the 3 existing outfalls being rehabbed.
Right.
Yes, but not for
an
an
anticipated
additional
structure in a new outfall because we didn't know where we were going to go. So we couldn't estimate that. And we couldn't estimate then the cost of the force mains required to go to said dissipated structure that we didn't know where it was going to be. So that couldn't be included in that base price.
And there was also the thought that if it was a very real possibility that we were not going to be able to address the dishes locally. So at that point, if we were going to have force mains within zone 2 or zone 3, then that additional cost would have been added on to those zones. But right now, you're looking at the 5.8. If we will have to take that and get the capacity like north or south, it would have been double and probably not with additional capacity. So that is really what happened. We had an opportunity that materialized. So that's why you're seeing the additional cost now. And I guess that's the explanation, Councilman.
Well, and actually, it is I am remembering now some more conversation about this, when we thought that there was a chance to get a big outfall much closer to Harbor Park, we thought that number was going to be a lot smaller.
Then
Then they-
moving it north.
No, and even then moving it to where you're moving it now, right?
I'm not quite following.
Like when you thought you were gonna be like on Matheson or something, it would have been less.
Oh, yeah, like, yes, yeah. So basically, I mean, the base has gone from 36 to 47. The three main reasons why is because now we were able to figure out where we were gonna get that extra discharge capacity. Inflation of 8% in the black base. That's it. That's what it boils down to.
I think we should.
No, look, I recognize your concern, and we'll make sure that we lay it out, because we've got a much more detailed cost estimate on it. Obviously, this is a summary, but.
We have a very
me talk.
detailed 130-page.
Yeah, so we'll sit them down.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's walk into now the utility cost room.
Okay, so that was the stormwater piece. The next piece of Zone 1 was all the utility undergrounding. Essentially, you're talking about the electrical, Comcast, AT&T, and then dealing with the water and sewer. Water and sewer is basically reimbursed, though, by the water and sewer department. So in total, all of that undergrounding effort for Zone 1 is 16.1, thereabouts, million. Okay, that would be added to the 47 million, okay? Then the last element of the Zone 1 project is the program support, and a large piece of that is acquiring the easement. So the hope going into this from the very beginning was that we would be approaching specific strategic properties that would align with where the pump station is to be able to get an easement, and that because people are all KB nice and wanting to help pull at the wagon and fix the problem, that they would voluntarily allow us to enter into an agreement with them to have a right to put an outfall. As hard as we tried, and on multiple occasions with multiple different properties, we were never able to get someone to agree to voluntarily give us an easement. So we essentially targeted a very specific opportunity, and that is an easement that we're going to have to compensate the property owner for, and that's that 2.5 million. Okay, 2.5 million. And then the last element is the program and construction management, the project management and construction management over the life of the Zone 1 project, which is about 3 fiscal years, which is 3.3. So all in all, when you combine it, you've got 16.1 or 5 for the undergrounding, you got 5.8 for the program support, which is added to the 46 for the stormwater piece and the roadway piece, which brings you to around 74 million. All in for the roadways, the stormwater, the utility undergrounding, the water, any sewer line movements or water line movements, all the program support, and purchasing the easement agreement that we need to put in a new outfall and dissipator structure.
So you guys presented to us the overall island project, right? I think you presented something with the underground, FPL undergrounding was something like 15 or 16 million or something. I told you that's what I remember.
Yeah, no, you remember correctly. And
I said,
then we
guys,
went back to the
low.
Kimley Horn master
Yeah,
plan.
that's
You were
like
spot on.
Okay.
No,
So
you
I
were
just
spot
noticed
on.
that this is now 16 million just for Zone 1 versus the whole island.
No, you were spot on, and it really forced us to go back and look at that more carefully. So
I just want to make sure that's why we see this.
Yeah, no,
shift
you're
in
remembering that correctly. Yeah, for sure.
What we were putting up there is just the materials cost that they had given us at that point. We hadn't tied in the labor cost.
So that said, we had a rough estimate of the whole island. So that number, whatever we had as a rough estimate of the whole island, has changed because that portion was incorrectly calculated, right? It would have gone up Because we were calculating 15 just for the materials, but it was actually much higher.
You're talking for the undergrounding, specifically
For the undergrounding.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the resiliency of putting the stormwater in and burying power lines throughout the whole island. We had, I think it was 253 million. It's probably much more than that because of the undergrounding was calculated too low at that time.
No, the 250 to 307 million, that was really the stormwater and the roadways.
Yeah.
That was
That's
that
right.
was
It doesn't even
stormwater-
have
that was
it didn't even
stormwater
have
and the
that
roadways.
It never had the utilities.
Yeah.
So, do you guys know is this 16 million? Is that based on the Kimley Horn amount, or is it much higher throughout the whole island to bury the power?
It's actually based on based on the 30%
that's
design, so they
actual
have linear
vendor
feet of conduit, cable.
I got that. So my question is, based on that,
What's
are
the
we-
rough number?
What's the rough number for the whole island
Right.
to bury the power lines, based on what you're kind of calculating right now? Are we still at the 48 million? Are we much?
We'd have to revisit it with the cost estimates that AECOM gave us, because those are much more accurate than what Kimley Horn provided us years ago.
But when
So,
you
but
were
we can do that.
but when you were going back
We
and
only-
forth with
We only have
Paul,
that detail for zone one.
at some point
That's fine,
he
yeah, I
gave
understand.
he
For the
gave
entire
you sort of like
village,
a
yeah.
rough.
Yeah.
He gave you a rough estimate.
We do have a rough estimate, but I would want to compare it to what AECOM just gave us and make sure that
Okay,
it
can
is
you do that?
comparable.
Can you
Yeah.
do that for us so we know what
Yeah.
we're looking at?
Yeah.
Sure.
And remember that 16 million also includes water and sewer, which wasn't in the Kimley Horn master plan.
Okay. That's good to know.
What's the current
Sorry.
state of thinking with respect to FP&L's financial obligation, ultimately?
What do you mean by financial obligation?
For undergrounding?
Their obligation to it?
Yeah.
If we choose to do it ahead of their timeline, their obligation is nothing.
If
We have a
wanted
25% reduction.
No, they do, yes,
There's
yes,
credits.
they reduce the cost, but
There's
yeah,
credits,
that's part of the calculation, yes.
So the 25% is in the 16 million?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's more like 14.2 when we're just talking about everything but water and sewer.
Right.
Or water, yeah. Or water
And
and
there's
water.
the bills.
Sorry, someone said a second ago that the water and sewer was in here. Where?
The slide
It's
before.
included in the utility.
Yeah,
It's
the bottom,
included in the
yeah.
utilities, but not backed out that it's not our expense.
It's backed out in the slide beforehand.
Okay, but when we see it here in this projected budget, it's
That's
just
not net.
included as a,
Right.
It is included in the. It's not backed
It's-
out.
It's,
Yeah.
so this
It's-
isn't.
I
this
thought you
isn't
said it was
showing our-
16.1.
okay,
This is just a full budget.
of what it is.
Right.
Okay,
So
thank you.
there's many funding sources that you can see, and I think we just go to the next.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, we have them, we have
4%.
them on the page right
Yeah,
next to it.
We've split it out for you so you can read it, but unfortunately this is a little small for everyone else. The pie chart shows our projected split based off of where we would be getting different financing mechanisms. If we're gonna use grants, we're gonna use the state revolving fund, and we have our general obligation bond, which is covering the utility undergrounding as well as land acquisition and easements so far in our projections. The SRF, as we described before, is extremely advantageous. The bond was passed in 2020, and it's a great use of funding to use for the utility undergrounding. That's an approved use. The little pie that you can't see very well is light blue, and that's just 5% of village capital expenses that are just coming from our general fund as appropriation through an annual budget process into the capital fund for the Zone 1 project. The grant percentage you see there is actually conservative. We have about a 70% success rate with our grants currently. This is assuming that all the grants that you see listed above that, in that total, we maybe get half. So we didn't want to overestimate, we didn't want to overpromise ourselves that we wouldn't, maybe we don't get 100% of the grants we go for. That's probably likely. The difference is if we don't get as many grants as we want, then that clean water state revolving fund pie gets a little bit bigger. So that's where the flex is. That's the strategy. The state revolving fund is sort of our stopgap if we don't get as many grants as we'd like. Similarly, if we get more than we think, that gets a little smaller. We don't have as big of a debt payment. We don't have as big of a loan. The bottom left portion that you see, we've put through sort of from now until about 2060 when all the debt's paid off through the bond and the state revolving fund for Zone 1, this is what we've calculated on average different size households would pay, including the stormwater fee and taxes just for Zone 1. This isn't including your current millage rate. This is in addition to your current millage, and this isn't including your current stormwater fee. This is in addition to your current stormwater fee. So for single-family homes that range from small to large, we're looking at potentially like a $500 to $1,200 expense on an annual basis for those years. And for multifamily, it's about 100 to 400. And I think our standard deviation is we're capturing close to 90% of the households in this range. So this is not to say that everyone's going to be paying one of these numbers at all. This is all dependent on the amount of impervious area that you have on your property and how that's calculated, and if you're homesteaded or not.
So we're talking about a low of 156 per year per household to
There are
12
outliers.
to 1,200 per
Right.
year per household.
Right, there are outliers.
Okay, all right.
There are certainly outliers, because what I also don't want to be, this is a little confusing, because that 6,000 square feet impervious and 3,000 square feet impervious, that's not the square footage of your home. That's not what is on Zillow that says you have a 2,500 square foot home. That's the amount of pavements or area of your actual rooftop that's calculated in the stormwater fee as impervious, as water that can't trickle down into the groundwater. It's not something that is easily calculated on your own, but we have all that information for every single household, and that's how these numbers were developed.
And do these numbers include the increase in operation
Yes.
costs that we'll have once these things are up and running?
For Zone 1 specifically, yes.
And these numbers, do they, are they showing the difference, or they're including what we're paying today and on top of that?
They are not including
No,
what you're paying
it's
today.
additional.
This is
The difference
in
This is
addition.
incremental.
Additional.
This
This
in
is
addition.
specifically the impact of Zone 1 on your stormwater fee and on your millage.
And whether you live in zone 1 or not, everybody's paying this.
This is across the board. This is everybody.
So I was just doing some calculation. I want to make sure that I've got this right. So about $75 million. Looks like we're going to get grants of your approximation up here, about $15 million. So right now, so the village is in for about $60 million. 3 to 4 we're going to pay right now. The WASD is going to pay about $2 million, and the other is either going to be by GOB and state revolving.
Correct.
And 60 million to protect 1.6 billion of property value.
Right.
So that, what's 60 million of 1.8 billion in terms of a percentage?
1.6, but
Yeah, but
Close.
1.6 billion dollars is not at risk because of rainwater coming down. We're talking about anybody who's low lying or any damage that can
Well,
happen.
it's not,
against their
it's
floors.
not just damages. It's the potential effect on property values and the economic viability of the area. It's not just damages.
What's the economic viability you're talking about?
We have to go back to the vulnerability assessment. They did a whole economic analysis.
It's
Right,
also,
but-
and
and
it's
the
also
vulnerability.
livability. It's the ability to drive down the road. You know, it's hard to imagine that, you know, someone who lives in a $4 or $5 million house is moving to Key Biscayne to be sitting with, you know, 2 or 3 feet of water, you know, somewhere in 2050. So, you know, we want to make sure that we don't discount the quality of life that this is going to bring as well.
There's a discussion, not here, some places, not about quality of life, but sustainability of life. What I mean is, you know, migration versus investment. It's hard to have that conversation, but
Well, it's also difficult to quantify that conversation, because at the end of the day, if a person is looking to sell their house, okay, for whatever reason, I want to move to Montana. They've got to attract a buyer to the area to buy their house.
No.
So when a person is looking to buy a house, then they're going to start asking themselves, well, where should I buy a house? Should I buy a house in an area that's flood prone or not? So should I buy on Miami Beach? Should I buy in Key Biscayne? Should I buy in Coral Gables?
Hey, Roland, what's going on?
Right,
So
okay,
let's
yeah, that's a philosophical
say that we can have that conversation. But what I want to do is I want to do 2 things before we finish here. One, I want to go back to how we, and you just said it before, are looking at this as an investment. And again, this is just top level investment, council member. And then also, I also like to end it on how do we have this flexibility going through that program assessment, going through that OODA loop.
The OODA loop.
To ensure that we have, different options that we come going forward. So, I don't know whether Mike's gonna go through this thing or you're gonna go through it, but let's talk about, again, just reiterating, the investment and that we're trying to do, what we're gonna try to protect in the village.
Absolutely, we just kind of recap that, and I would just want to clarify that this number includes only direct costs, so property loss, content loss, wage loss for actual, that site, but it doesn't include the indirect costs, which would be migration. It doesn't include,
Insurability.
sure, or personal wage loss, so if they can't leave their home and they don't make money because they can't leave their home, it does not include that. It does include shelters and hotel rooms.
Slide 28.
But at the end of the day, again, we're looking at it as an investment in the property value. And for Zone 1 specifically, really the only property that would have an impact on that would be the school. But obviously, when you go expand that through the village, there's the
So
commercial.
what I want to do, so Mike, unless there's any questions on the investment part, I think that we've hit it again. What I like to end is, again, just our flexibility, our ability to make decisions, after we finish Zone 1. We're committed to Zone 1. We just talked about the plan to go forward on Zone 1. We talked about the flexibility that we wanted over the last year. And we put together this decision-making process. It kind of goes through the observe process. We stop, we pause. Are we getting the benefit that we want? Once we begin to look at other areas, we begin to orient and focus on that. We come back, we make a decision, and then of course we act. Some of the alternatives, and these aren't set in stone, but 3 of them that we're looking at is we can continue on down the zone approach, which is doing, I don't have the exact order, but 2, 6, 7, 8, whatever it might be. Or we can just shift and go to targeted areas, whether that be part of Zone 2, whether that be part of Zone 3, whether it be Ocean Lane Drive. Again, that's decisions we can make as we go forward. And lastly, we decide that Zone 1 is successful. At least we've solved the problem in the short term, and we want to take some time off, and we'll just move forward to going through an underground utility. So I want to make sure that we've built in flexibility. Right now, we're driving forward on Zone 1, but we have the opportunity to stop, pause, make decisions, and go forward as necessary.
I think, could I just add one piece to that? Over the past year, working with Black and Beach, we've structured the entire program, framed it up, developed all the tools, all the tracking tools, all the scheduling tools, in order to proceed or not proceed. But one thing's for sure, everything that was developed is necessary to successfully execute and optimally execute Zone 1. What happens after Zone 1? That's the decision of council present or future. But everything is in place regardless of which way council chooses to go or the community has the stomach for going. And so that needs to be just made clear.
So to wrap it up and all kind of summarize what Roland said, we have the whole decision-making process. We've got the criteria in place that enable us to walk through that. And then what I like to end, Mike, unfortunately, we don't have the time to go through this thing, but I do want to show before we go forward. There is, trust me, there is a system behind the system. This is the sausage maker of all sausage makers. We can go in there and we can come up with different scenarios that we wanted to go forward. It'll give us the cost estimate. It's actually moving right now. It'll give us the timeline it will take to execute this. So there is a lot of, so to speak, sausage behind this process when we go forward to make a decision in the future.
I want to thank you all for coming out, and I want staff and the engineers, you can stay around a few more minutes. If you all have questions to them individually, please take the time to do that, and we will continue to inform you about the progress of this project. And we still have a ways to go before we finish with the design. And then hopefully maybe there are ways that we can make this project cheaper, and that's something that we're going to continue to look at to see how we can streamline it. And then a decision eventually will be made as to go forward with construction or not. So there's still a bit of ways to go, but I want you to have the opportunity to talk to the people that are here for a few more minutes so that you can take advantage of them while they have this thing fresh. Again, thank you for coming out tonight, And with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.